to today's Trainer Education webinar, 10 Ways to Develop Remarkable Leaders, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Kevin Eikenberry. Today's webinar will last approximately an hour. Before we begin, note that there is a question and answer button. It may be also called a chat box for you. You can use that area during the webinar to submit any questions that you have. And then we'll either answer those questions as they come in during our Q&A session at the end of the presentation or by email after the session. My name is Sarah Montgomery, and I will moderate today's webinar. I am in business development for HRDQ, a publisher of research-based training solutions that improve the performance of individuals, teams, and organizations. Today's presenter is Kevin Eikenberry, Chief Potential Officer of the Eikenberry Group, a learning and consulting company that provides a wide range of services, including training delivery and design, facilitation, leadership coaching, organizational consulting, and speaking services. His expertise includes leadership, teams, and facilitation. Kevin has worked with many major organizations such as Chevron, John Deere, Southwest Airlines, and the U.S. Marine Corps. In addition, he is the author of many books, including Remarkable Leadership, Unleashing Your Potential, One Skill at a Time, From Bud to Boss, Secrets to a Successful Transition to Remarkable Leadership, and Vantage Point on Learning and Life. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Kevin.
Sarah, it's my pleasure to be with you and with all of the other good folks all around, and I'm glad to be with you. So let's dive right in and talk about how we can develop more remarkable leaders. So let's start with why we should do it. Now, at some level, you're all here because you know why. I mean, you wanted to be here to talk about developing leaders. Let me give you some maybe more ammunition, or maybe to think of some additional benefits that you hadn't already considered. Number one is leaders help make organizations work. If we don't have successful leaders, then we can't create what we want to create. So if we want to build our organization, if we want to be able to maintain our organization, if we want to build our organizational capacity to do new things, we've got to develop leaders. The leaders we have may be doing what we need today, but that's not going to stay that way. You know, one of the major reasons why people leave an organization, and I know that maybe in your industry in the more recent past there's been less turnover, mostly because people haven't found another place to go. But that's going to change again. If it hasn't already in your industry, it will. And so one of the things that we absolutely know is that people often leave a job not because of the job, but because of their boss. And so if we develop more effective leaders, we're going to reduce turnover, not only of those they lead, but of them themselves. Listen, the best leaders want to have opportunities to continue to grow, and if you're not providing them those opportunities, they're going to be looking somewhere else. So when we develop leaders, we reduce turnover across our organization. When we develop more effective leaders, we increase employee satisfaction, again, across the board with those leaders lead as well as with those leaders themselves. And so employee satisfaction and engagement is a huge reason and value that comes from developing leaders. We create sustainability for our organizations. Our organizations can't continue, even at their current level, without strong leadership, and so developing leaders helps us maintain the status quo, if you will, if you want to think about it that way. We've got to at least do that. And so if we're not investing in and building our leaders and building our bench strength, if you will, and building our pipeline, then we can't sustain our organization over the long haul. And most of us aren't just trying to survive, we're trying to thrive. And so there's no way that we can grow our organization, whether that's with new products, new markets, new parts of the world, in any number of ways. However you want to look at growth, you're not going to support that. You're not going to grow very successfully without strong leadership. One of those 5 reasons might be your reason. You might have another reason. But whatever it is, I hope that you come into this thinking about that, because my hope is that we're going to give you great ideas for how to develop leaders, and it all comes back to these reasons. The reasons why are the most important place for us to start. So I'd encourage you to think about your reasons as we continue. So who is this session for? Well, I don't know who all is here, who's been attracted to the message that Sarah and her team has put out for this session, but I can tell you that I built this session for 3 groups of people. I built this for individual leaders. As an individual leader, you can listen to these ideas, you can implement these strategies to help you build your own leadership development process, to help you think about how do I build my skills as a leader more effectively. This session is for you, if that's you. This session is for the organization as a whole. Those benefits that I just spoke to were really organizational benefits, and so the session is certainly for organizations that are thinking about how do we build our leaders, how do we strengthen our leadership capacity in our organization. And this session is also for you. Whoa, let's go back, everyone. Sorry about that. This session is also for you. It's for you because if you're a trainer or if you're an HR professional or you're responsible for leadership development in your organization, then this session is going to speak directly and 100% to you. So as I told someone yesterday in a different context, buckle up, because we're going to spend some time doing things that are going to make a difference for you and for your organization starting right now. So let's start with, I'm guessing that in your organization you have some existing leadership development processes. They may be formal, they may be less formal, they may be new, they may be long-standing, but whatever the level of success that they have, let's talk for a second about why it is that leadership development processes, leadership development programs fail. They fail for a variety of reasons, and let's talk about these. And as we talk about them, these can be a way for you to think about, well, if things in ours aren't going as well as we'd like, then maybe these give you some ideas right off the bat. The first reason that leadership development programs fail is that they are event-based. They're event-based. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about the times in your life when you've been the most effective as a learner, you will find that while there may be a moment, an aha moment, a teachable moment, there may be an event that helped to catalyze your learning, that learning isn't really about an event. Learning is a process that we keep it growing, we keep changing, we get new insights, we make a change. So I would say it this way, and I'd encourage you to write this down because it's not on the slides, and that is that training is an event, but learning is a process. What we need to be doing is building leadership development learning, not just training. And so these programs often fail because they are event-based. They're based on pieces of training put together and sending people and having them check off the box that they've been to this thing. So they're not necessarily integrated together. We bought one training from one place. We bought one training from someplace else. We built this thing. We did this thing. They're not integrated. But more importantly, they're not integrated with the work. People go to class and then they go back to the real world. So however good the workshop is, or the series of workshops are, if I go for a day or two, or I attend the monthly webinar, and then I go back to my desk and don't do anything with it, I'm not accountable for anything, I'm not working on applying it in any way, if that training isn't seen by the participant as directly relevant to their work, it's not going to get integrated, and that's one of the reasons that these programs fail. The next reason that they fail is that leadership is not engaged. So let's talk for a second about first-line supervisors, new supervisors, which may be a part of what you're trying to think about here. Certainly in a broad-scale organizational look at leadership development, you'd want to be thinking about first-line supervisors. Sarah mentioned that one of my books is called From Bud to Boss. It's one of the things that I think is highly important for us to think about. So if we're talking about first-line supervisors, for example, then they have a boss, and if we want that training or learning to be effective, then their leaders need to be engaged and involved in it. And if they're not, let's look at it this way. You go to training and you go back and try to implement it, but if your boss doesn't know, your leader, your manager doesn't know what you learned and can't support it, then you're likely to lose steam, lose momentum, and probably not apply what you could have learned. There's enough challenges for us to apply it without having other roadblocks, intended or not. So we've got to engage the leaders of the learners, and we've got to engage senior leadership. I'm guessing all of you that are listening to me say these words have at some point read in one of our trade magazines or in a business magazine or business journal about a CEO that's involved in the leadership development training of their organization or is involved in onboarding in their company. And you think, wow, that's engaged. That's people really making a stand. Here's why senior leadership needs to be involved in leadership development. It's a critical business process, as we've already described, and so why wouldn't they be involved? And more importantly than that, perhaps, is that their presence and their involvement says a lot about how important it is. I just wrote a blog post this very morning about how we can talk about our values. They don't really mean anything. Our values only are real when we take action on them. It's one thing for leaders, senior leaders especially, to say leadership development is important. People are going to believe it when they get involved. And how they're engaged and exactly what they do can be different in your organization, one from another. The reality is, if they're not engaged, if they're not invested, if they're not a part of it, then the chances of it having as much success as it could is limited. Next, that leadership development processes are not broadly applied. In other words, we pick a few people and we give our high potential people some opportunities and no one else. I'm not saying that there isn't room in our talent management processes and in our leadership development plans to identify high potentials and give them opportunities. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying if the only people that we're giving anything to are those people, we're not broadly applying the chance to learn and build our leadership skills, then we are crippling ourselves and we're causing a lot of the problems that we mentioned on the earlier slide to happen. Decreased engagement, decreased employee satisfaction, more turnover of those less than high potential leaders. And listen, if we're is it possible that we've not identified all of the most highest potential people? Is it possible that we've misdiagnosed? Is it possible that we've sliced that group too thinly? And I would say the answer is very likely. And so we'll be more successful, you'll be more successful in your leadership development efforts when you apply that more broadly, when you engage leadership more, when you integrate things more, and when you make it more about process and not just about events. I'll say it again, training is a process, training is an event, and learning is a process. Training is an event, learning is a process. You want to build processes to build leaders over time, so you got to think about it from a process perspective, which is exactly what we're going to do today. So if you go to our website as of today at kevineikenberry.com, you would see this quotation at the top. And it says, extraordinary potential exists in all of us. With the right environment, resources, skills, and knowledge, ordinary people can produce extraordinary results. Ordinary people can produce extraordinary results. I believe this. I wrote this. I italicized 4 words because whoever you are, whatever role you are and why you're listening to this, the reality is that you have some influence over environment, resources, skills, and knowledge. And this call, this webinar, is really about helping identify what the right environment, resources, skills, and knowledge are so that ordinary people, ordinary leaders can produce extraordinary results. And so with that as a starting point, let's talk about what I say a successful process of leadership development will look like. Instead of give you 10 ways, I'm going to actually give you more than that. Process ideas, things that you need to do, things you want to put into your leadership development efforts. Again, whether this is just for you or whether you're responsible for this in your organization, whether you're early on in building a brand new process from the ground up, or whether you're looking to enhance what you've got, add new pieces to what you've got. Let's talk about that a little bit. So the first thing is that a successful leadership development process is going to be process focused. Duh. It's not going to be just about a single event or a series of events, but even if you do have 3, 4, 5 workshops or a series of lunch and learn sessions or whatever you have, that you think about them as a process, as a system, as a whole, rather than checking the box that people came to this one, checking the box that people came to the next one. How can we connect them together? And a lot of the ideas I'm going to share with you will help you think about that very point. So it's got to be process focused. It's the first thing, and that's where we'll start. The next thing that I want to tell you is that it needs to be integrated. It needs to have leadership involved. And I mentioned that already. Let's say it again. If you want to have your process work, you need to have leaders involved. I mentioned that they ought to be involved. Let's talk about what some of those ways could be. If you're training leaders at a certain level, then their bosses, their managers, their leaders need to know what's in that training. If they haven't attended, and perhaps they're attending right alongside, which is great, but they need to know what's in the training, what's being stressed, what's important, why, so that they can reinforce it, they can be involved in it. If they can have an active role in it in one way or another, whether that's participating in a panel, whether that's playing a mentoring role, whether that's leading a training session, any of those things, the more involved we get our leaders, the more invested they are, the more successful our process is going to be. The third thing on this list is that the things that are being learned need to be integrated with daily work and working systems. So if you're, the simple case, if you're developing new leadership development processes, then are the things that you're teaching there being held accountable for that in your performance reviews? Are the goals that they're being asked to set connected to these processes? These are ways to connect it to the working systems. You've got to make this look like the individual leader needs to totally and 100% recognize that this learning process is a part of my job. It's not an extra thing. It's not something I go to when I can fit it into my schedule. It's not something that I roll my eyes about because I have to go when I've got too much real work, quote unquote, to do. We've got to help integrate this into people's daily work so that they are invested in, recognize the value of, and are applying what they're learning on a daily basis. And if we do that right, there's no reason, if we do some of the things we're talking about right, there's no reason why people won't see it that way. It will become a part of your organizational culture, that this is what leadership development looks like. It's a part of my job. It's a part of my job description. It's a part of our organizational values based on our actions. The next thing says include engagement strategies. What do I mean by engagement strategies? Well, here's what I mean is that it could be any number of things. Again, how do I make sure that people are engaged? This starts in a workshop setting if you're using that model where you're engaging people in the training. See, if you have training that is technically sound, has great content, but is dull as the day is long, if it's death by PowerPoint, and you're not engaging people in that learning environment, how can you expect them to be engaged with what they're learning when they get back to work? So another part of this, thinking about it from a process perspective, and I know that there are many people, or I'm guessing that there are many of you on this call that are training professionals that are excellent facilitators of learning, and I applaud you for that. And you got to recognize that that's important, and that can't be sacrificed in the bigger picture of how all this fits together. You're building a set of expectations, and you're building a culture about learning that includes engagement strategies starting in the workshop and continuing far beyond in terms of all manner of other things. So there are 4 parts of the process. Let's talk about another 4. The next one is feedback and benchmarking. How can people improve if they don't get feedback? Well, we sort of all know that. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here. In fact, let me just stop and say that I'm probably not going to say anything today individually, any individual sentence that you're going to say, well, I didn't already know that. There will be some of you that say, I already knew what you're talking about, Kevin. That's fine. The reality is, are you applying it? So I don't have any problem with saying things to you that maybe you need to be reminded of, or that I need to be reminded of for me to be more successful. Some of the most important learning that we can achieve is things that we might say we're relearning. And so we all know the importance of feedback, but are you building feedback into your leadership development process? Is there a chance for peer review and peer feedback? Are there a chance for people to work in groups in some way, for people to get a chance to understand and see how their behavior as a leader is influencing those around them? Probably the most obvious way to think about this feedback and benchmarking thing would be to use a 360 assessment. HRDQ has a number of great 360 assessments. We have a 360 assessment. I'm a big fan of 360 assessments when they're done correctly. And done correctly is not done as an event. Have everybody fill it out and then next item on the checklist. That's not going to work most of the time. In fact, if we think about a benchmarking process or a 360 process as an event, it has the chance to be detrimental. I have clients that I've worked with that I have extremely high trust with them, and pretty much anything that I recommend to them, they're going to consider highly and take action on. But with one particular client, it doesn't matter how long-standing our relationships, how broadly based the number of ways that we've helped them have been, the close relationship I have with the senior staff. If I bring up 360 assessments, they turn their nose and turn around and walk away. I happen to believe it's the single most important next step they could do to build their leaders. However, they've got past experience that was painful. They got past experience that didn't work well. They got past experience with 360s that led to retribution and second guessing and things being seen as less than anonymous. And because of that pain, years ago, I might add, I can't get them to reconsider that because it wasn't done well. It was done as an event. It wasn't done successfully. If we're going to do feedback and benchmarking, people like you and me that are able to give that feedback, that are able to interpret that feedback in a way that will be most helpful for that leader, that part needs to be part of your process. So I'm a big fan of feedback and benchmarking, whatever it looks like, whether it looks like 360, whether it looks like feedback circles, whether it looks like whatever it looks like. But people need to know how they're doing. They need to self-assess, and they need to get feedback from others, especially in a leadership role. How am I impacting those I'm leading? Is it working or not? What could I do different or better? Got to be a part of the process. The next thing is we need to have consistent selection. I talked earlier about having a broader view. I think we need to have selection for these programs. And I recognize that oftentimes there are budgetary considerations, and maybe we can't from a budgetary perspective or from a logistical perspective put everybody or get everybody involved in these programs at one time. But the reality is the selection needs to be done in a consistent way that needs to pass the bulletin board test. Do we have criteria that we're using that lead to who gets involved and when? And are we applying that criteria rigorously, and are we letting people know what those criteria are so it doesn't look like the good old boys, good old girls network, or the people that only work in the home office get invited, or whomever, whatever that looks like. Are the people that are getting selected, are there enough of them, broadly enough based for us to make a difference, first of all? And secondly, are we consistent in our selection of them so that it passes the bulletin board test, okay? The next item on the list says an interactive design. I talked a little bit about this. The training itself needs to be interactive in nature. The overall process needs to be interactive in nature. Are we letting our leaders have input into what their process looks like and how they can impact their process? Do they get a chance to have input into some of the activities perhaps, or some of the ways that they learn? Do they get a chance to impact based on their learning style, some of the tools that are applied or how they're applied? The design needs to be interactive in every way, because that's how learning happens, is when it's interactive and when people are engaged and when people create ownership. And so we need to do that, and when we do that, we'll have a better process. Next, talk about accountability, and I've hinted at this already a couple of times. If we're going to build this into work systems, we've got to hold people accountable for what they're learning. If we're asking them to build action plans and they get thrown in the back of the binder, if the binder from the training gathers dust on their credenza until they move to a new office, there's no accountability there. We've got to have accountability throughout the process, and I think that starts with accountability of my boss letting me know why this program is important and why I'm a part of it, and what's expected of me. And so there's accountability there. There's accountability amongst peers in the program or as a part of the leadership development process. I would strongly encourage you to use learning partner types approaches in the training and in your processes as well. All of those sorts of things, very, very important. So there are 8 pieces of the process so far. I got 4 more. So I promised you 10. I'm going to give you 12. The next one is coaching and mentoring. I don't know how. See, leadership is a complex thing. Leadership is a highly complex thing. I have had the good fortune to work with some leaders from NASA, rocket scientists, smart people. And when I ask them, which is more difficult, being a rocket scientist, they don't necessarily like those words. But what's more difficult, being a rocket scientist or being a leader? To a person, they say, Kevin, being a leader is far more complex. It's an ongoing path of learning that there are areas of gray I can't there's no one specific answer. If I want to build a rocket to launch it into orbit and get it into orbit, there are complex formulas that we have to figure out, but if we use the right formula in the right time, we put the right numbers in it, we check our work, we'll get the right answer. Leadership isn't that way. We need coaches and mentors. We can't just look to the textbook and find the answer. There are a lot of popular books that have been written called things like the Leadership Phrase Book or Questions to Ask, and these are useful things to help us, but there's no perfect phrase. There's no perfect answer. It's shades of gray. For us to have successful leadership development, for us as individuals and for us as organizations, coaching and mentoring have to be a part of the process. Peer coaching, perhaps, coaching from our bosses, coaching to 360s, coaching in conjunction with the ongoing process, mentors throughout the organization. Another great way to get senior leaders involved is to have them volunteer or be a part of a mentoring process for our various folks. Very important. I can't stress enough to you how valuable the coaching and mentoring part is, and I would go as far as to say, if you're really serious about having a successful, true leadership development process and not just some events, that coaching and mentoring, however formal or informal that may look like, is critical to the process. There's got to be action planning. I mentioned that before. Most any training is going to, at the end, say, hey, what did you learn? I'm looking at a note sheet that I'll be handing out to people at a keynote I'm going to give in San Diego later this week, and this one-pager that I'll give people to take some notes on. At the top says, what are the 3 ideas I'm going to apply? I mean, we all do that, but if we're getting serious about helping leaders grow, then we need to have them do real action planning, and we need to have them not just write down what they're going to do, but what are the steps they're going to take, when they're going to do it by, what's it going to look like, how's that going to be. That's why I think training ought to look more like a process. It ought to be done over time. Now, I am often asked, and we deliver public workshops that are 2 days long on the Bud to Boss content, on leadership, what we call leadership training camp, 2-day-long workshops, and can those be valuable? Of course they can, but in so many ways it's so much better to have the content broken down into smaller pieces so I can learn 1 or 2 key things about 1 or 2 competencies or skills, and then go back and start applying them. And then let's come back again in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, and do a little more and bring a little more content and get a little more chance to learn something new. Take some things we've learned and applied and drop those back into our subconscious, bring something new out. Ongoing, process-focused, driven around action planning. It's absolutely got to be focused on application and use. So it's not just about, here's what I'd like to go try, but that your processes need to be application focused. I'm a big fan of people doing what are often called in college a capstone project. So you've been going to college for 4 years, hopefully only 4, and you finish, and when you're finishing your degree, many times now, they'll have a capstone project that's meant to coalesce everything that people have learned in 3.5 years of college and apply that to real-life problems, real-life situations. I'm a big fan of doing the same kind of idea in our leadership development processes, putting people on a team to work on a business problem, making people responsible for a business process improvement, whatever it might be, giving them the chance to work on something real, maybe outside, maybe inside or maybe outside of their normal work boundaries, with the express intent of not only solving a business challenge, but applying the skills that they're learned, and people are being asked and being held accountable for both the result and the process. And the last thing I would say about a leadership development process is it should be flexible, and we should be able to identify pieces that some people need more than others. We should be able to identify pieces that are required of everyone, and others maybe that are elective or taken in the timing when things matter most. One of the best things about any learning situation is when we can get it right when we need it. If a leader in your organization is in 2 months is going to be giving a presentation to the board of directors, and if you've got presentation skills training that's an option, for example, the best time for them to get that is 6 weeks before they're going to give that big presentation, not 4 months from now when it's in the schedule. So the more flexible we can make our programs, the more flexible we can make our processes, the better. So I've given you 12 things, and now I'll put them all on one page for you. right there. They're all same words, all 12 of them there, and there's a lot there. Think about this like a checklist for you. Think about this if you've got existing programs to say, how many of these things are we doing? How would we grade out on each of these 12 things? And probably some of them better than others, and that's okay. It gives us a sense to say, where are we strong, where are we weak, where do we want to emphasize or focus next? And so having this list, having this as a checklist, having this as a wish list perhaps, if you're in the stages or in the throes of starting to build or rebuild or add on to your process, now you've got this as a tool to help you think about and move forward with the overall plan, with the overall process. So there's the whole list. I'll read them to you again. A leadership development process should be process-focused. It should involve leadership at the highest levels and involve them as much as possible. And if that's done without coercion, all the better. If people are actively willing to be involved, that's a first step to me knowing that leadership development process is going to be successful. It implies resources, it implies energy, it implies focus. It's very important. Integrated, your process should be integrated with work and systems. It should fit in, dovetail in with the work. It should include engagement strategies, feedback, and benchmarking should be involved. We should consistently select people and select people broadly. The design should, at all levels and all parts of the process, should be interactive with the learner and leader. There should be accountability to people so they know it's important and they take it seriously and we get the results we want. Coaching and mentoring, I would highly suggest being a part of your process. Action planning has to be involved. We want to talk about how we can get people to apply the lessons they're learning to their real-life situations. And lastly, the more flexible we can make it within reason, the better off we'll be because we can meet people's needs where they are as they need them. I'm not saying it should be a total free-for-all, but having some flexibility is probably better than not. So there are the 12, again, in summary mode. So again, if you have an existing process, look at that 12 and say, what do we got? What do we don't have? Where might we need to go next? And maybe you're on this call because you're in that thinking process, and hopefully one or more of these things has struck you or you've been reminded of where you said, that's where we need to focus. So what have we got? What's missing? What's a strength? What's not? Thinking about those things and where you want to go if you've got an existing process. Now, if you want to work on improving your existing process now, here are some things I would encourage you to do. First thing I would encourage you to do is to identify the weak or missing components. You know, like what are you missing at all? Like, I got no coaching and mentoring involved. Well, maybe that's where we want to start. We're not doing any benchmarking feedback. There's no assessment process of any kind, 360 or otherwise. Maybe that's where we need to start. Identify those and then devote time and effort and energy into closing those gaps where there may be glaring weaknesses or holes. And the other thing is to get help. Now, that may sound self-serving when I say that. I say that for this purpose, and that is that we can't, when we've built something or we've lived something for a long time, it's hard for us to see everything that's there. I mean, getting help could be as simple as two colleagues in two different organizations agreeing to spend a day in the other organization, checking things out, looking at things, asking tough questions, asking obvious questions, asking, you know, whatever, and trying to help us see it differently, helping us see it. So getting help is important. The other, of course, another reason for getting help is a lot of times people treat leadership development processes like we know it's important, but we just never get around to it. Now, I was a kid, it's kind of corny, I know, but someone handed me this little round piece of wood about the size of a quarter, and it said on it, round to it, and now I had a round to it. And you can get so if I were to hand you one of those, then you could get to it. Here's the thing, you are resource strapped. And if you've been saying we've got to get at this, we need to get to this, we keep putting it on our plans and never get to it, then that's another reason why you need to get help. For all the reasons we've talked about, leadership development is critical to your organization's success short-term and long-term. And so I'd encourage you to think about getting help, whatever that looks like, whether that's hiring a consultant, whether that's bringing in additional trainers, whether that's bringing in coaching expertise, whether that's raising the level of skills of your senior leadership so they can be more engaged. Whatever that is, figure out what that looks like and get that help because it'll help you be more successful. So if you want to create remarkable leaders now, here are some things that I think that you ought to do very specifically. One is, I think that you've got to get coaching and mentoring involved. I've already mentioned that. Well, that could look like formal coaching. That could look like informal coaching. That could look like specific times set up with a specific coach or mentor. And that could be more informal. But even if it's more informal, still an expectation. It could be internal coaches. It could be people like you who serve as coaches with an internal understanding but a neutral observational point of reference. It could be internally building a set of coaches to do this, whether that's you or others. It could also be external, bringing in external coaches at one or more levels. We have some clients where they've built an integrated process that they're putting lots of leaders throughout the organization into, and one of the ways that they're further supporting their high potentials is they're giving them an external coach that might provide a different perspective, a little more perspective, a little tougher challenge perhaps for them. So there are ways to do this that this isn't just a sales pitch to say go hire external coaches. It's to say that you got to have coaching and mentoring in this. Leadership is too complex for us to try to figure it out all on our own. Even if we get good ideas in a training session, go back to implementing them, we need help and assistance, and coaching and mentoring is a way to do that. I would strongly encourage you to add a 360 assessment to your process and make it a process. From my perspective, what that looks like is whatever 360 tool you use, and I've never seen a bad one personally. What makes them not work is the fact there's nothing that goes around them. They're dropped into an organization. People don't know why they're doing them. They don't know how to read the assessment results. They don't know how to apply the results. So to me, a 360 process looks like do the assessment, prepare the organization to know what's coming and why it's coming. Do it in a way that doesn't give people 16 of these to fill out at one time. Do it in a thought-out manner. And then the process includes time with a coach, someone who's knowledgeable about that assessment to help a leader recognize, understand, and apply what they've learned, and not to misinterpret it, which is what often happens. Oh, I see this. This is what I need to go do. Oftentimes, that's where the biggest problems occur. So helping people, coaching people through understanding what they say and what they don't say, and then I believe further coaching later to help them support them in the action plan that they've built as a result of what they did learn and take from it. And you've got to provide people additional resources, and there are resources everywhere. HRDQ's got resources of all kinds. You can go to your favorite bookseller and find all sorts of resources. You can Google any leadership skill and find stuff. And so providing additional resources to people is a really important part of how you can get started now. All of, these 3 bullet points I've just shared, these apply to you as an individual. If you're wanting to build your process and you're saying, hey, my organization's not really doing this the way I wish we would or could, and you're sort of at a loss, invest in a 360 for yourself. Start thinking about the resources that you can apply yourself. I'm a big believer that organizations ought to be at the forefront of helping leaders grow, and in the end, our leadership development belongs precisely and 100% to us. If we work in an organization or if we support an organization that's doing that for their people, great. And in the end, it still belongs to the individual leader. So there are some things that we can do. Now, I said this earlier, extraordinary potential exists in all of us. With the right environment, resources, skills, and knowledge, ordinary people can produce extraordinary results. I believe that if you start to think about the things that we've talked about, that you start to think about environment, resources, skills, and knowledge. What are the skills and knowledge that you want to build for your leaders? And then what are the resources and environment you need to create in order to put that all together so that you can get the extraordinary potential that exists within your leaders and future leaders? You invested a lot of money to hire people. You worked hard to find the right people. Now that you got them, how are you helping them grow to become and reach their potential? That's part of our job as leaders for others, and certainly as leaders, we need to be doing that, being on the forefront of that. So there are some of those additional resources. I just listed a whole bunch of things, but let me share with you 3 additional resources from us that might be of use to you in that process. And again, that list could be long, both from us and from others. But here are 3 things. Number 1 is the Remarkable Leadership Learning System. And you can see there the link. The Remarkable Leadership Learning System is our 1 month at a time, 1 skill at a time approach to helping leaders be more effective. We have ways you can go there and you can sign up as an individual leader. We can work with you to plug parts of this or all of this in to what you're doing as a part of your overall process, or work with you to think about all that so you can learn a lot more about that there. If you're specifically thinking about helping first-time leaders, new leaders in your organization, we've got a free community called the Bud to Boss community where there are resources and video and a blog and all sorts of things there specifically to help individual new leaders or organizations that are supporting new leaders. And we'd love for you to go and join us there when you can, or recognize, to share that with others in your organization. And lastly, you see a link to my blog. I've mentioned something that I wrote just today. I write multiple blog posts per week, and we'd certainly love to have you join us there and contribute to that community and conversation as well. So those are some resources. Those are some ideas. Those are some things that take us down a path and help us think about how do we develop more remarkable leaders, which is what I promised at the front end. And we talked about process. So I've talked far too long. I've talked about this being an engaging process and an interactive process and a flexible process, and now I've done all the talking. So now I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah and see if we have some questions that have come in or if she has any comments. And Sarah, I'm at the ready for you.
Fabulous. Well, we have a number of questions that have already come in throughout your presentation, so go ahead and keep those coming in, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. We're going to go ahead here and kind of work my way backwards, I think might make sense for you here, Kevin. But we have a question from Magali who asks, what should be included in a 360 assessment?
Well, again, there are lots of great 360s out there. I mean, ours is based around the 13 competencies that we've identified in Remarkable Leadership, so there's stuff in there about that. But I think the big key is that however the 360 is designed in terms of the questions, if you will, again, I've never seen a bad one. I'm not saying there isn't a bad one out there, but in the end, it's about the rest of the process. So it's about helping leaders make sure they're picking the right raters. It's about the organization recognizing that the value of doing these ratings and that we want people to invest the time necessary to do it well, because bad data gets us bad results, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So most 360 assessments give you the chance to get feedback in multiple categories, like from your boss or your manager, like from your peers, like from your team that you lead, and then many of them, including ours, also includes an other category. So maybe vendors, people in other departments, customers, people in other parts of your life even perhaps. So I think it's a big part of what needs to be involved is pick a tool that works for your organization, and then insert the tool and the process carefully so that people know what it's for, that raters do a good job of it, and that take it seriously, and that leaders do a good job of picking the right people to include. Left to their own devices, if I'd be cynical about it, some people might say, well, I'll just pick all the people that like me, and I'll get better feedback, right? If I believe that a 360 assessment, that the results of it should belong to that individual leader. I'm a strong believer that they should share their results with their boss, but I don't believe that whole document needs to be put in their file or anything like that. But whatever your process looks like there, that all needs to be transparent on the front end so people know what's going on. So those are some things beyond the tool itself, Sarah, that I would say are some of the things that people ought to think about.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here. We have the same question coming in from a few people. Carolina asked it, Ralph asked it, but they're asking around how do you sell this concept that the learning is needed in the group. So there are leaders that maybe are resistant to change or that aren't feeling that this is a specific need in their organization, and how do you, primarily probably from the trainer perspective, how do you sell that within your organization that this is really something that they need to spend time on?
Well, I'm going to answer it from two different perspectives. I'm going to answer it because I think I heard two perspectives there, two different groups perhaps that I've got to sell it to. First of all, do I need to be selling it to upper management? Like, am I bought in as a trainer or an HR professional or an OD person, but I can't convince leadership that the organization we need to do this? Well, that's one set of things. The other that I heard was, how do I convince people to come? How do I convince individual leaders who are busy to engage? So it goes back to one of my very first slides, and I won't try to mess this up by going back there. But I had a slide that says, what's the value? It's really about answering the why question. So let's talk first about the individual leaders. Are there individual leaders that are resistant to change? Yes. Are there individual leaders that think life is perfect for them? No. And so help people figure out where their pain is. Help people see, or help people see a picture of something better, right? So if we can help people identify a why, if we can tie it to a business result, if we can look at turnover and we can identify that this is, so Sarah, you keep coming to me as a leader with all these challenges on your team, but you don't want to go to training. You may not ask the question quite that way, but if you know they've got challenges, you talk to them about the challenges and you say, wouldn't it be grand if, or what if you had some additional tools to help you in that way, or those sorts of things. So directionally now we're talking about how do we influence and persuade people, and it's got to start with people have to have their own vision and their own why this is going to work, and so that's important. So if I'm saying how do I convince, influence, or persuade senior management to invest time, energy, resources, etc., I think again it comes back to that first list. What's the why? What are the stated business strategic objectives, whatever words your organization uses, and just basically ask senior leaders to reflect on those and say, can we achieve those without strong leadership? No. If we haven't achieved them up until now, why not? Well, when you start to ask those questions, they're going to quickly start to see, well, we have capacity. We need to build people's skills. We need to build capacity. We need more leaders. We need better leaders, whatever that looks like. So help them come to a discovery of that on their own using what they're already saying is important, because what they know is what they want. What you know is how they can get there. And leadership development is a how. And so we have to help people see the how. And that would be, there's a couple of thoughts. That's a whole webinar right there, Sarah. Write that down. Have someone lead that seminar, tell a seminar someday. I would do it. Hint, hint, hint. But go ahead.
Good, and we would actually like that. On the side now around identifying leaders, we have some questions that coming in around the, does everyone have that capacity to be a leader, or how do you spot that remarkable leader?
Well, I get asked that question, the first part of that question, a lot, which phrased a different way, Sarah, would be, are leaders made or born? Right? And my answer to that question is yes, that leaders are both made and born. That, without going into a long and drawn-out thought here, let me just say this, that in my life, at 49 years old, I've gotten lots of birth announcements from friends and family, and never once have I seen a birth announcement that said, today we announced the birth of a leader. And yet if I read the obituaries in the newspaper, which, Sarah, I read more often now than when I was younger, and I'm not sure why. But I will say that when I look at obituaries, it doesn't matter what paper, what day, what do you see? You see that people that have left this world have left leading organizations and community groups and churches and volunteer groups and businesses. And so something's happening between birth and death. That the skills of leadership are learnable. So how do we identify leaders? We recognize that I believe everyone has the potential to lead if given the opportunity and if they recognize that and have the desire. Now, those are some ifs, right? The desire if is not really in your control, and really is even at some level difficult for you to influence. But the opportunity one is a totally different one, right? And we do have that opportunity. So I think that look in your organization and you will see leaders. You will see leaders at different levels of capacity and desire, different levels of experience and current aptitude. But from a potential standpoint, it's there. And in fact, you could think of someone in your career that you know that really wasn't working out in their company or maybe even got fired. But in some other part of their life, they were turned on, fired up, passionate about, and probably exhibiting many of the things that all of us would describe as effective things for leadership. So it's a matter of tapping into people's desire and connecting to those things. I think that's a really important part. And then the second part of the question that you asked was how do you find the remarkable ones, I think. Is that sort of what you said, Sarah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so because leaders are made and born, the thing is who does seem to exhibit the desire, who has already made some progress. That doesn't mean that others can't, right? It just means that maybe there's a place to start. The other big mistake that organizations make all over, every industry, every part of the world, every part of the company, is that we tend to promote people who are best at the last job. So the best salesman becomes the sales manager, and the best plant line guy or gal becomes the foreman, and the best staff accountant becomes the senior accountant. So we've all experienced those kinds of things. And so I think that when we think about identifying the skills of leadership, your organization probably has a competency model or some things that you say this is what leadership looks like. Start looking for those and not just looking for the people that are good at their current job, because they aren't necessarily the same thing. And so that's another thing that I would encourage us to be aware of and careful about. And if you don't have a leadership competency model or some sort of things that work for you, there are a bunch of good books that can give you a model to look at. I could recommend some. It probably wouldn't be surprising which ones I'd recommend, but we'll go on. Go ahead. But there are a ton of great books. They're on my shelves. I'm looking at them right now. So pick one. It's sort of like the 360 thing, because a lot of people that have written about and built models have built 360s with them. There's not a bad model. We're taking this complex thing of leadership and slicing it into pieces, right? And in your organization, however you've chosen to slice it, those slices are the key. And so maybe one of the things to finding your 360 is finding a way that slices it in a way that matches languaging-wise the way your organization thinks about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good. Well, we have time for one more question. Keep sending in your questions. We will respond to those after the webinar. So go ahead and continue to send those in.
That's right. Sarah's going to make me answer them all.
Yeah, I do actually.
And it'll be fine. I'll be happy to answer them. So please do send them in. Go ahead, Sarah.
Our last question here is from Anne. Anne asks, what are your thoughts on how to ensure the ongoing skill application? So after you've done that leadership workshop, how are you applying those ongoing skills?
Well, I'm a big fan of, again, that's partly where I think coaching comes in and holding people accountable, right? So if we send people to, let's just say, to a 2-day workshop or a 1-day workshop, then that action plan, people should be held accountable for that, and whether that's with a peer coach, whether that's with their boss, whether that's with an external coach, whatever it is, and that people have to recognize this is an expectation of my job, that I'm doing those things. That's part of it. But I'm also a really big fan, as I've said before, and Sarah, you're going to say more about it in a second, I'm a really big fan of splitting apart the training into smaller pieces so that, if you go to a 2-day workshop or a 1-day workshop or a half-a-day workshop, if you're interested at all, you're going to get several ideas. Even if some of them are things that you already, quote, knew but haven't been doing, you're going to get several ideas. It's really hard at the end of a really good training session like you would put on, Anne, that it's going to be really hard for people to only come up with 3 things they could do when they got a list of 17 things in their notes. So there's one of the challenges. We need to break it up into smaller pieces so that people can work on 1 or 2 things at a time. Improve those things, drop those into their subconscious habit, and bring out 1 or 2 more to work on again later. So by extending the learning, by chunking the learning, improves the likelihood and makes it easier for people to apply, because it doesn't seem as daunting. And we can work on 1 thing for 30 days and get better on that 1 thing. Then we can work on another thing for 30 days. And I'm making a note because I wrote a really good blog post about that very thing. I'm going to make a note of that, Sarah, so that I send that to you, okay?
Great.
All right. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes. It does actually, and one of our attendees, Susanna, just responded out that was exactly how today's seminar went. So you exhibited your answer within your webinar presentation, which is perfect.
Well, I hope so, and when people tell me that I'm modeling what I'm teaching, that's the highest compliment I could possibly get, so thank you.
Thank you. Good. Well, keep sending in those questions. Kevin will be responding to all of those, and you'll get those by email after the session, as well as everybody else's questions that came in. So it won't just be your answer. You'll, with your question, it'll actually be everything. So go ahead and take a look at those. As Kevin mentioned, today's presentation is the foundation of the Remarkable Leadership Workshop. And it's an assessment that you want to use in your organization. It will achieve results that you're looking for. You can review the facilitator set for 30 days risk-free. It's 40% off for you for attending today's webinar. The set does include the trainer instructions, workshop outline, PowerPoint presentation for the classroom, and then there are workbooks for each of the 12 modules. So it breaks it down for you in pieces so that you can easily work through as you need to and prioritize those sessions. You also get then the hardcover, the best-selling book from Kevin Eikenberry as well. So
Sarah, can I just say one thing?
Absolutely.
And we did not plan this, but I'm going to say this, along with all the things that Sarah just said it gets. If you order because you were on this webinar, here's what else you get. We'll give you my email address, personal email address, and so once you get it, if you've got questions, email me directly and I'll answer your questions.
Wonderful. Fabulous. Good. Well, we have a couple questions still coming in, so we'll hang on the line here, so go ahead and send those in. And we do certainly appreciate your time today, and we hope you found today's webinar informative.
Thanks, everybody.